A brain injury is never expected and never wanted in someone's life. And we are a source of support for many of these family members who find themselves very quickly in a position where their loved one is severely injured. Brain injury can be devastating to a family. And I should mention that brain injuries run the gamut from a concussive injury, which usually and hopefully would heal on its own, to very severe traumatic brain injuries and everything in between. There's a story that is very unique to our organization, especially when concussive injuries became more prevalent in the news in the last few years. We had a father who had a son who was about 12 years old, who was playing ice hockey, and the son had sustained a pretty significant concussion. So the dad had brought him to the pediatrician, and the family pediatrician, didn't know that much about brain injury and said that his son could go back on the ice for practice as long as it was no contact, not recognizing something called sudden impact syndrome. Sudden impact syndrome can happen with a concussed brain of someone young, a youth, because their brains are still developing, and they're at risk if they go out into a situation where they get secondary brain injury of permanent disability and sometimes even death. It's rare, but it does happen. So this dad didn't have any of this information. The pediatrician hadn't shared any of this information. And he had learned about the Brain Injury Alliance of Connecticut and had contacted us for some additional resources. While I was having this discussion with him, he mentioned about his son going back to practice, being cleared from the physician to go back on the ice. I educated him about sudden impact syndrome and the potential for a secondary injury and what that can mean for his son, and provided him some other resources and materials that he was unaware of as it related to concussive injuries, and he pulled his son from that practice, which was happening about an hour after we spoke on the phone. So this is a very direct way in which our education and support allowed this father to prevent a potentially devastating secondary injury for his son. We know that the only cure for a brain injury is preventing one in the first place. So part of what we do is to go out into the community and educate individuals and schools and those in Connecticut about preventing brain injuries. Brain injury impacts everyone, regardless of age, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, and we have thousands of residents in the state of Connecticut that sustain brain injuries every year. The other part of what we do is we are a resource in recovery for someone that has experienced a brain injury. So to that end, we operate an information and resource line, and the line is staffed by master-level professionals who assist callers related to their brain injuries. Sometimes the callers are a brain injury survivor themselves or a family member of someone with a brain injury, and sometimes those callers are professionals that serve those with brain injuries. Sometimes a family member might call us from the hospital. Their loved one is in the neurointensive care unit and they don't know if their loved one will survive. And they're contacting us to make sure that resources are available to go to their loved one, that they're in the best place that provides that rehabilitation or that ICU so that they can get through the survival mode. Other times we work with family members. They have a loved one, a daughter or a son or a husband or a wife who sustained a brain injury many years ago, and they're still struggling with the ramifications of that brain injury. So brain injury impacts people from a cognitive perspective, an emotional perspective, a physical perspective, and an intellectual perspective. And all of those things can be disrupted and changed after a brain injury, and it doesn't often go away. So someone with a brain injury will often live with these consequences for the rest of their lives, and families have to adjust to that experience, which can be really challenging. Imagine when you have to deal with an insurance issue, how difficult that is without a brain injury, even for people like us. Now throw in a brain injury, and even making that initial phone call and being put on hold for 10 minutes or not knowing how to press the buttons to get to the right person can be incredibly frustrating after a brain injury. So when I get to help someone, even a little bit, negotiate a really challenging, overwhelming bureaucracy, like an insurance company or a state agency that's there to provide them supports and services, but doesn't know how to do that effectively, I feel really, really good. At the same time, there are times when there are no resources or supports for a particular person that has a need, and Connecticut is not set up for different reasons to provide that support, and that feels really bad at the end of the day when we can't do what we would like to do for someone. So in those situations, the best that I can do is offer a supportive ear and listen to someone, validate their concerns and their frustrations, and hope that that's enough.